Welcome to Leading with Empathy and Allyship, where we have deep, real conversations to build empathy for one another and to take action to be more inclusive and to lead the change in our workplaces and communities. I'm Melinda Epler, founder and CEO of Change Catalyst and author of How to Be an Ally. I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion speaker, advocate, and advisor. You can learn more about my work and sign up to join us for a live recording at ally.cc. All right, let's dive in. Welcome, everyone, to our Change Catalyst live event series and the Leading with Empathy and Allyship show, where we have deep, real conversations about how we can be more inclusive in our workplaces and communities. And so most of you know, I'm Melinda Epler, the host, author of How to Be an Ally, and founder and CEO of Change Catalyst, where we build inclusive innovation through training, consulting, coaching, and events. So today our topic is creating empathy and allyship across global teams. So we'll be talking about how we can better work together on global teams across different cultures, genders, and disabilities, and the intersectionalities. So we have two incredible guests who are disability and social justice activists, and I'm excited to introduce our two incredible guests today. So we have Ndopu, who is a humanitarian and SDG advocate. SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, for those of you who don't know. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Awesome. And Eleanor Lisney, who is a campaigner and activist. Welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here.
Awesome. So for those of you who are tuning in via YouTube and also through our Zoom as well, so we have YouTube and Zoom both going together today. Our ASL interpreters are Ruby and Dana from our partners Interpreter Now. You can learn more about them at www.interpreter-now.com. And this is also being live captioned by Maggie at White Coat Captioning. So if you're on Zoom, you can turn on captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then anybody who on YouTube should see the captions automatically. Okay, so Eddie and Eleanor, First thing, if we could just quickly describe ourselves for anybody who's blind or low vision too. So I can start. I am a white woman with long blonde and red hair. I'm wearing black and white glasses and a long sleeve dark blue shirt. And in my background, I have the same background that I describe often. So just briefly, my book is in the background with some plants on one side, and on the other side is a small bookshelf with another plant kind of going down the side of it.
Awesome. I'm Eddie. I am a, let's say, newly minted 30-something-year-old. I'm a Black man. I'm wearing a gray blazer, and I'm seated in front of a black wall. And I have thick black rimmed glasses.
Hello, I'm Eleanor. I'm ethnically Chinese, East Asian. I've got very short hair at the moment, mostly tinged with grey. I've got quite large glasses and long dangly blue earrings, wearing a hoodie, grey hoodie, and my background, I'm in an Ibis hotel at the moment. And so my background is of the sort of hotel room with a door and cupboard, kind of messy. Yeah.
Excellent. And thank you for joining us so late. I know it's late where you are. And it looks like we have some audience attendees from the UK tuning in. It's late where you are too. Excellent. So let's start by you each sharing a bit about your story. Where did you grow up? How did you end up doing the work you do today? And Eddie, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I'll say is that I think, like so many folks today, I am an unrepentant multi-hyphenate. So I wear many hats. I would describe myself as an activist, as a humanitarian, as a storyteller. But I think first and foremost, I would really say that the label I identify with the most is really a human being who's deeply committed to change and the amplification of the voices of marginalized people who are furthest behind the line of opportunity. I live with a degenerative condition called spinal muscular atrophy. I was diagnosed at the age of 2, and I was given a prognosis of 5. So I have now outlived myself by 26 years and counting. And really, my worldview and my advocacy is really informed by my lived experience as a Black, queer, disabled man, and really navigating the world, trying to carve out a space of dignity, a space of self-actualization for myself. And I'd say the through line of my work has always been the idea that I believe that disabled people specifically should have access to more than compliance, right? To more than just ticking a box. It really is the pursuit of a big life, the pursuit of autonomy, of self-determination, and this has really been the through line throughout my life. I started my disability rights advocacy by really advocating for myself, first and foremost, as a boy navigating mainstream education, being only among a handful of disabled children entering the mainstream education system in Namibia, in Southern Africa. And I just really began to think about myself and to think about my life as being so much more than the awful statistics that tend to define the lived experiences of disabled African children. About 90% of children with disabilities throughout the continent where I'm from, throughout Africa and much of the developing world, have never seen the inside of a classroom. And don't have access to education at all. And so I made it my life's mission to not just have access to education as a personal achievement, but really as a symbolic victory for African children with disabilities throughout the world. And so I hold a master's degree from Oxford, and really use my platform and my advocacy to really dismantle ableism and the ways in which ableism really intersects with other forms of social exclusion.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Eleanor, how about you?
Trying to put it in a nutshell, I was born and bred in Malaysia in mainstream education. I, in a single-sex school, convent school, in fact, I had polio when I was 3, and I was the only disabled person I knew until I went to university in the UK. So in that sense, I think as a child, I grew up angry because I didn't know why I was excluded. The kind of fights that disabled children get into, I had no knowledge of because I had nobody to compare myself with. But after saying all that, I think I'm very lucky because I have parents who refuse to give up on me. I mean, people have suggested to them because they were very young that they should put me in an orphanage and just get on and have more children. I was their eldest and my parents refused to give up on me. And they fought very hard to get me the medicine and the kind of love that I needed. And I think that is one of the most important ways that a disabled child can, if you like, get the confidence to be an activist is by having people, parents, who put the trust and love you unconditionally. And I say that because they let me go to the UK on my own, although my siblings, I'm the eldest, my siblings had gone before me. And they said, well, if you can't get on, just come back, you know. And I think that's another thing about disabled parents is being able to let go of their, you know, disabled children. So to keep it short, I went to the UK. I still had no idea what disability rights were at that time. I don't think there were that many. And, you know, I did the thing that I thought I wanted very much for myself. And so I got married. I graduated and got married. Had children very young. And keep it short, I then started understanding about disability politics. I started working for a disabled people's publication. And then, of course, my ex-husband decided that, we decided that he wanted to go to France and work there. And I wasn't much of a, I can't say I wasn't much of a feminist, but I think I did what most women would do, and is that you give priority to your family. And even though I really enjoyed what I started doing in London in sort of disability rights and being creative, went off to France where I didn't speak a single word of French. You know, didn't know anything about anything. And, you know, I think my daughter-in-law said that she said it was incredibly difficult bringing up a child, you know, my grandson, with my son, and the two of them. She said, I didn't know how you manage with two children on your own in a country where you don't speak the language. But I did. I can't remember what I did, but I did. So then I was mother and full-time wife, full-time mother for 10 years, in which I won't go into it. And I thought I should really go back and work. And so instead of coming back to the UK, I decided, I think because of the ADA and access rights, I thought it was more accessible in the US. I went off to University of Texas, Austin, and did information studies. Oh, by that, I already had a master's in literature, English literature, but I thought that it wasn't much of a use when it comes to getting a job. So I did another master's in the States, and I didn't quite work out in the States because there's no such thing as reasonable adjustments and things like that that I know about in the UK. It's all about physical access in the States. It's not about how you actually manage about being a disabled person, I think. But all that is sort of politics that I didn't quite get on in the States. So I came back to Europe, and lo and behold, I got a job, and I got offered a job in the UK, and I came back to the UK from University. And very soon after that, I gave that up, became self-employed, went into disability equality. was a quango with the government. So it's a sort of conduit between disabled people and the government at that time. And lo and behold, we had to change the government. That was 2010. So yeah, so from there until now, I am a disability advocate, and I campaign for disability equality and disability justice, as Lydia now calls it. And that's quite important to me. And from very early on, I had always insisted on intersectionality because that's where I come from. As Adi said, I wear so many hats. I don't believe in just fighting for access and disability because, as I said, I think I'm very lucky. And that's a thing about being your social status, your social capital, all that sort of stuff, which is important, I think. So I won't go on and on just to say that that's where I am, and director not just of Sisters of Frida, which is a collective of disabled women, Culture Access, which is for access into all sorts of different types of culture, which includes food and and race and stuff like that. And also director of in the board of directors for EDR, which stands for End Racism and Violence Against People of East and Southeast Asian Communities. Sorry, hope that wasn't too long.
That was great. That was great. And incredible.
And I have
work
2 children and a grandson.
Wow. Just on top of all of that. Yes.
That's the most important thing. Yeah.
So when you both have worked in several different regions in the world, when you think about building empathy across global teams, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What do you think about, and how do we activate our empathy and build empathy across global teams?
From my perspective, I think about this notion of leadership, right? And who gets to be a leader. I think that for marginalized communities, whether we're talking along the lines of gender or disability or race or any other category, and all of the above, I think it's really important that we see leadership in these communities, and not just communities that need to be folded into existing structures and folded into sort of, predetermined social arrangements. I think that we do ourselves a great disservice by failing to recognize that it is in all of our interests to have leaders emerge from marginalized communities, right? So the empathy question, I think, is also a potential question. It's really about seeing, really recognizing and validating the contributions, the excellence, the brilliance, the insights, the beauty of marginalized communities, right? That it's in all of our interests, right? So it would, for me, I think it's so important to sort of have that deeper articulation of empathy, that it's not just a question of feeling somebody else's plight or recognizing somebody else's plight, but also being able to recognize their full humanity, that people have behind all of these statistics, I mentioned the statistic that has really kept me up at night for the better part of my 20s, right? Which is, between 90 and 98% of disabled children across the global South not having access to education. Behind those statistics are real people with hopes and with dreams, with aspirations, with fears, with anxieties, right? And I think a more complex articulation of what it means to be operating from a place of exclusion, that empathy requires that we see people beyond their circumstances, their current circumstances. We see people beyond poverty. We see people beyond marginalization and actually have a full perspective that sort of takes them, to possibility and new frontiers of being and of existence. And so, I'd say that becomes incredibly important when operating across borders. That the vision that we have for the lives of people here in the United States, that people on the other side of the globe, whether they're, in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, that the populations of those places also have huge visions for themselves and the kind of lives that they hope to live and impart, for their children. So I think that would sort of be my initial take.
Beautiful. How about you, Eleanor?
I think I agree with Ade, and I think the SDGs leave no one behind, isn't it? That's the main kind of slogan. And I think and that's why I keep saying I feel very privileged, because for a lot of disabled people, especially across the rest of the world, there are lots of things that we all have as disabled things in common, and discrimination is one of them. But another aspect is for a lot of disabled people, it's also just survival.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, like, it keeps me awake, and I sort of, that's why I always say I feel very privileged that, I don't have to worry. I mean, I do have to worry where the next accessible toilet is, but then I don't have to worry like girls in India not having the right toilets, that they might get raped and forget it if you're disabled. That those kind of problems just is immense. That's why I say survival. And also, and I say that for a lot of us, we have very similar issues and barriers, is that I'm also in the team of the international, INWIT, we call it, International Women with Disabilities, International Women with Disabilities, yes, at the Association of International Women with Disabilities. And very often, disabled women from all over the world chip in, and we can sort of agree with each other and see the differences or the similarities. And that is also, Eddie talked about lived experience, and that's one thing that I feel very humbled by. And even though, I shouldn't say even though, because Malaysia is quite people in Malaysia are quite well educated, I think. I never had an issue with language, because, as I say, my first degree is in English literature, and I have a master's in English literature. So if I have any problems with that, that's my own fault. But when I went to France, as I said, I didn't understand the word, didn't speak the word. And the way people look at you and treat you when you don't speak the language is an awful experience, because you're not only belittled, but you're looked as though, that you're dead, because you can't articulate. And that is so much that sometimes I think we take for granted. If we speak the major languages in the world, whether it's English or French or German or Spanish, that if you don't have that, and this is why, and if you don't, and for disabled people, if you can't articulate, if you don't have the capacity to speak, it is an awful experience and an awful barrier, because so much of it depends on you being able to fight for yourself. And we both say we're advocates. You can't advocate if you don't have the language. And that is something that I find humbling, I think is the word I can think of. And, I admire people who can, who have that kind of capacity, because if you don't have language, then you lose even more agency, and the ableism is even much more there, I think. So sorry, I went away from leadership, and sometimes for me, leadership, if you like, sort of the empathy part, is just understanding that. And I've been working with my colleagues on co-production. And this is not so much leadership. It is co-design, it's co-production. And what they do, what they say is of equal value. And to a certain extent, some people say, what kind of lead, how do you lead? And it's not about leading. It's about, in a way, the right type of following. Yeah. So I can say about that.
That leaders need to think about following about what they do. Yeah.
What your community, what they are saying. Because, sometimes I say, well, I can put out a huge CD. You see, I'm director of this, I do that. I have got so much. However, what does that prove in a way?
Yeah. And Eddie, you mentioned, we've mentioned in this conversation already, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Can you talk a little bit about your work around the SDGs and how this relates and specifically to the workplace? How does it connect to the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for folks who don't know, the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by all 193 member states of the United Nations in 2015. And what underpins the Sustainable Development Goals are really 17 bold, audacious targets for humanity. Everything from the eradication of extreme poverty to tackling climate change and the ecological breakdown of the planet, to the promotion of gender equality and the promotion of education, you name it. And these 17 goals really function as a blueprint and a compass for humanity, that we will achieve these 17 goals by the year 2030. the truth of the matter is, and it is a sobering and heartbreaking truth, is that we are veering off course in terms of meeting these goals, these 17 goals for sustainable development, because of various factors. Of course, COVID, I think, really exposed what was already there before, which was deeply entrenched inequality, and everything that we're sort of bearing witness to right now as far as geopolitical tensions, and just the state of the world has meant that we are terribly off course as far as achieving these 17 sustainable development goals are concerned. Having said that, though, it is my firm belief that the global goals are our best attempt at being able to really double down on these really important things. I think that they're still incredibly important, and I have the enormous honor of being one of the 17 official advocates for the SDGs appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I think the SDG agenda is particularly important for a conversation around how do we think about systems change, right? I think that is the real conversation, is that we want to move beyond compliance. We want to move beyond ticking a box. We want to do the right thing, because the right thing means that we actually need to fundamentally reimagine the social architecture of the world. It really is about a new way of being, a new way of interacting with one another across borders, but a new way of imagining our relationship to the planet as well. And so it is a far broader vision. It is not an incremental vision that we're talking about. We're talking about a new vision for humanity, one that is truly inclusive, and one that really centers the need for radical progress and transformation in critical areas. And so I think that it's important that organizations align their strategic priorities and their strategic objectives with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, Eleanor mentioned, and I was so happy that you mentioned that leaving nobody behind is the principle that underpins the entire Sustainable Development Agenda. Now, the question becomes, what does that actually mean to say that we leave nobody behind? And that's why, I opened my remarks with leadership, because I think it's not just about feeling good about ourselves that we include people. It's more than inclusion, right? Is that when we include, inclusion serves a purpose. Inclusion is meant to actually transform, right? It is meant to result in systems change. It's not inclusion for inclusion's sake, by just sort of, bringing new voices and new faces into the room, but it's about actually saying, in so doing, when we center intersectionality, that has far-reaching implications for how we think about business, how we think about our supply chains, how we think about strategy, how we think about every single aspect of society and life, right? And so leaving nobody behind. To leave nobody behind means that we fundamentally alter the status quo. We're not talking about business as usual. We're talking about a fundamentally new vision for society and for organizations at large, right? And so I believe that the SDGs, when interpreted correctly, I think could be an incredibly powerful framework for how we get to a future that is truly inclusive for all of us.
Thank you for that. And, something that I hadn't thought about before around intersectionality is thinking about intersectionality across different identities and marginalized experiences with marginalization. And also there are intersections within the sustainable development goals as well. I hadn't really thought about that before, and that is really in thinking about all of that together that we really get to the next stage of our evolution in workplaces and across the globe as well.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing to that, because I think that's incredibly important, is it is the indivisibility and the intersectionality of the goals, right? Like, I don't think we can tackle the climate crisis without connecting it to gender inequality, without connecting it to disability justice, because at the forefront of the climate justice conversation and catastrophe are Indigenous, disabled women of color who are bearing the brunt of the ecological breakdown of the planet, right? Until we fundamentally kind of need to reimagine the fight for defending the planet through an intersectional lens. And so connecting the dots between the various goals becomes incredibly important. So thank you, Melinda, for highlighting that. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you so we will get to questions. I see a couple of questions coming into the Q&A. Please, if you have questions, put them there. And we'll move to questions in a moment. But this is Disability Pride Month here in the US, and it's starting to grow in other regions as well. And I want to recognize that the importance of that intersectionally, specifically social justice for people with disabilities or disability justice. And I want to talk about allyship in particular. How can we activate what would you like to see in terms of allyship, more allyship around disability justice globally? And maybe I'll start with you, Eleanor. How do you think about allyship?
I think you said that most people know what allyship means. So I won't go into that. It is tough being a good ally, and it's an active thing, because I always say that even though I am very often with my LGBT friends, in fact, so much so that people just assume that I must be from that community. I think I have to carefully choose sometimes where I stand as an ally and not sort of jump into, oh, my best friend is such and such, so, you can speak for him or her, that kind of thing. Especially for my trans friends. And again, there I just sort of very often just sit and learn, and being and not speaking. Sometimes it's much better as an ally rather than sort of go into the defense because you think that's the right thing to do. Although sometimes I'm grateful when people come and step in and fight for me, because it's very often, if you are of that community, you need people to fight for you because you haven't got the energy. It's so personal. And it's like, for me as a disabled woman, I've got attacked before that I'm being divisive because they say there's no gender in disability. So, to have a collective of disabled women, that is being divisive. And somebody just stepped in and just fought for me. Well, I'm going like open mouth. How can anybody think such a thing, kind of thing? So I think being an ally is just sort of I keep saying learning. And I depend, and maybe it's because I'm much more still at this age, very much a student, learning from my LGBT friends, from my friends who are from other disadvantaged groups, if you want to call it, minoritized groups, whatever, because very often it's important to shut up and let them have a voice. And very often, I think some people who think that they are your ally think that that gives them a right to speak for you. And it's a tightrope. It's a balance you have to do. And also, if I can add this bit, I think once in a talk I gave, I said being intersectional can be a very lonely business because it's like you are invited to very many tables because you kind of like, you're this and you're that. Sometimes I get invited because I tick so many boxes, sort of thing. You're disabled, you're a person of color, you're a woman, etc. And I'm an immigrant and all that sort of stuff. However, very often you are invited to all those tables, but you can't actually sit at any of those tables because it's intersection. If I'm sitting, let's say, if I'm talking as a disabled person, very often the disabled colleagues, or they don't understand the racial, the kind of prejudice, discrimination you have as a person of color. And if you are among friends who are, people of color, they don't understand your accessible needs. And that is why I say, sometimes it's difficult and sometimes it's lonely. And sometimes people say, oh, isn't it great because you can do this and you can do that. And it's like belonging to several cultures, but you don't exactly fit in. And that, I think, well, maybe it's just my problem. It's a bit long-winded, wasn't it?
I hope you see some of the chats and the reactions, by the way. How about you, Eddie? How do you view allyship? And how do you view allyship?
Well, I mean, so much of what Eleanor has shared really just resonates with me on a profoundly deep level. And Eleanor, you made me think about the distinction between being an ally and being a savior, and how we need to be very careful that we don't conflate those two things. Because I think it can get pretty murky where people demonstrate allyship through wanting to kind of save and co-opt. And I think a way around that in the context of disability, I think we need to shift the conversation from having allies for disability inclusion to allies in the dismantling of ableism, right? Because ableism implicates both disabled and non-disabled people alike. Ableism will dehumanize disabled people, but ableism also strips non-disabled people of their own humanity. So when you're fighting against ableism as a non-disabled person, you're not fighting for me as a disabled person. You are fighting for yourself, right? You're fighting for yourself for a world that doesn't reduce us to narrow conceptions of what bodies should and shouldn't do. You're fighting for a world that actually is a world that embraces all kinds of ways of being, right? A multiplicity of ways of showing up. You're fighting for a world that is more innovative, for a world that is more loving, for a world that is more beautiful. And so that kind of allyship that implicates who you are in the dismantling of ableism, for me, that feels like we are co-conspirators, that we're in this together, and that I'm not being saved, but that we are saving each other through a mutual recognition that this system, the society that is built on ableism, is not working for all of us. It's not working for disabled people. And if we look closely, it's actually not working for non-disabled people either, right? So I think I have sort of had to make the shift for myself internally that this is not a niche thing, right? That disability justice is actually about all of us, because it's about reimagining a new world, another way of being, that brings my non-disabled siblings along the ride with me, and that we are co-conspirators. So I just want to offer that. And I think, Eleanor, thank you so much for also really speaking honestly about how lonely it is, sort of inhabiting a space of intersectionality. I think that is so true, and that resonates so deeply. And I think part of the work of intersectionality is also the refusal to be compartmentalized. I think that is when we do intersectionality right, that we say that intersectionality is not about gluing together different identities. You take a little bit of race, you take a bit of sexuality, you take a bit of gender, you take a bit of disability, you glue them together, and voila, you've got intersectionality. I think that is a profound misreading of intersectionality. I think that intersectionality, which is gifted to us by Kimberly Crenshaw, who invented the term, intersectionality is a methodology. It is a framework to be able to make sense of how we all embody not just a multiplicity of identities, but that we stand at the crossroads of different ways of seeing the world, and that's a good thing. That actually it's not a disabled table or a racial table or a sexuality table or a gender table, but it's a new human table. It's a completely new way of just imagining what a table is. If it is even a table, maybe it's something else completely. And so I think we've yet to fully harness the power and the magnificence and the beauty of intersectionality. And for as long as we compartmentalize our politics and our public policy, as Eleanor mentioned, it's going to be lonely for so many of us, and we'll feel really lost that we don't belong anywhere. And I think we can flip it. I think we can refuse compartmentalization and actually invite everybody into a world of multiplicity.
I love that. I want to jump to questions here. And there's some great reflections, by the way, in the chat. I can share them with you afterwards too. Emily asks, when we talk about empathetic leaders, I think it is good to attach accountability to observable behaviors. What observable behaviors would you like to see from leaders around empathy? Maybe Eleanor, would you answer that question? So what kinds of behaviors around would you like to see from leaders as they show empathy?
I think it's people leaders who kind of make me feel that I matter. If I can put the I into it and not just sort of speak in general. For me to feel that a leader is emphatic or has empathy is that person shows that they understand where I'm coming from. And it doesn't mean that I can see that they are walking in my shoes or, in those kind of terms. And it's willing, and I'm using the word walk, which is kind of, some people say it's kind of ironic because I'm always using a wheelchair. But I think that metaphor, it's important that you can feel that that person is willing to journey with you. Does that sound reasonable when I say that is what I think empathy is that person is willing to come with you, to go where you're going, and to understand the sort of commitments, understand the barriers that you have, not as in Eddie saying being your savior, but, sharing it. It's important.
Anything to add, Eddie?
I mean, that was so brilliant, Eleanor. I think maybe what I'll just add is that I think empathetic leadership is also about a deep willingness, and I said it earlier, but I keep coming back to it, is to move beyond compliance. Compliance is not going to get us to inclusion. I think that, empathy demands more, right? That we are really thinking about a new vision for how we lead organizations. It is a systems change conversation. And so I think that's where the accountability piece, that it's not a nice to have. It's not a kind of do good endeavor or practice. It is a profoundly visionary thing to be able to demonstrate empathy in one's leadership style as far as inclusion is concerned.
Can I add to that? Adi has mentioned compliance a few times. And if you're talking about globally, compliance means different in different countries. I think I just wanted to add that. In the US, you have the ADA. In the UK, you have disability. You have the Equality Act, and in China, in Malaysia, and the sort of whether people follow or not, it's so different as well. So you might be compliant in the UK, and I have friends back in Malaysia who say, but your laws are so brilliant. I was like, yeah, but the people here don't think so. I just wanted to add that bit.
And if I could just respond to that, I think, Eleanor, you're so right. And I think for me, I would describe compliance in another way and maybe say the bare minimum and the minimum threshold, right? I think there's a reason why even when amazing policies and pieces of legislation are passed, we as disabled people still feel frustrated. We still feel angry. We still feel hurt. We still feel pain. And we ask ourselves why, right? Because everybody will say, well, you've got reasonable accommodation. What more do you need? What more do you want, right? You've got beautiful pieces of legislation. And the truth of the matter is the feeling that we feel that inadequacy is because we need more. We need more than just the bare minimum in order to really exercise our agency as full human beings, right? And so that is going to require a vision that goes beyond just the policy. The policy is absolutely necessary, and I wouldn't minimize its role. But I think what we're asking for is a cultural revolution and a social revolution in terms of the engagement between non-disabled and disabled people.
We have another question, Eddie. How can we help leaders identify goals within an organization that aligns with the SDGs and measure the financial impact of meeting such goals? Obviously, a big question, but any thoughts for getting to start?
That's a big question, and I think again, I would say that kind of conversation is it's a pretty existential one. I think businesses need to ask themselves, what kind of world do they want to be doing business in, right? Like how do they want it? It's a pretty existential question. So aligning one's organization to the Sustainable Development Goals, I think really is a conversation about vision. It's a conversation about mission. It's a conversation about fundamental strategy and product development. Are we going to design products that are inherently universally universally designed, right? So that we don't have a need to think about accessibility as an afterthought, because it is already intrinsic to the way that we design our products and our services and our offerings. So it's a conversation that needs to be, I think, treated with seriousness and I think a deep willingness. It's an invitation to imagine, again, another way of existing and doing business in the world today. That would be, that's the it's ambitions, but I think we're not going to move the needle if we don't raise the level of ambition for meeting these goals.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I know we're running over time. I want to ask you both really quickly. What is one individual action you would like listeners and watchers to take after our conversation, after being with us with our conversation today?
Shall I start?
Yes, go ahead.
I realize that we're all, whether we want to or not, we're often in our own bubbles. And I would like if people here are willing to kind of step out of that bubble and, make an effort to understand, I wouldn't say intersectionally or whatever, just to understand somebody else with whom they might never think of being. I'm explaining that very badly, but like for example, for me, what it means to be a refugee, for example. What does it mean to have to lose, all that is dear to you? And I once thought that, and I still do that. One of the things if the house goes on fire and I have to run, the one thing I take with me is my passport. That sort of thinking, what is dear to you? What would you do? For example, I don't mean a refugee. You can think of what if you're a disabled person, you can't play the sport you want to play. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
I guess, piggybacking off of Eleanor's points, I think implicating ourselves in ableism, that it impacts all of us, and we can be co-conspirators regardless of ability and disability in the dismantling of ableism. And so my invitation to everyone here is to really think about how ableism affects you at an individual level, and then work towards dismantling it in solidarity with disabled people.
Fantastic. Thank you both. Thank you both for all the work you do, for sharing your incredible insight with us today. Really appreciate you. And thank you to everyone who has joined us live. This podcast will be released next week if you missed some of it or if you want to share it. And we'll also have show notes as well. And we will continue having conversations around global teams as well, because this is a frequently requested topic. So please check out our podcast as we go into the next few weeks. And we won't have an August event, so we'll see you back in September live. But in the meantime, we'll have weekly episodes for the next several weeks. So do stay tuned and have a great summer, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
To learn more about this episode's topic, visit ally.cc. Allyship is a journey. It's a journey of self-exploration, learning, unlearning, healing, and taking consistent action. And the more we take action, the more we grow as leaders and transform our communities. So what action will you take today? Please share your actions and learning with us by emailing podcast@changecatalyst.co or on social media, because we'd love to hear from you. And thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel and share this. Let's keep building allies around the world. Leading with Empathy and Allyship is an original show by Change Catalyst, where we build inclusive innovation through training, consulting, and events. Appreciate you listening to our show and taking action as an ally. See you next week.